There are moments in life when silence becomes the loudest sound you'll ever hear, and for me, that moment came when my own son looked me in the eye and called everything I'd built worthless. My name is Harold, and at 73 years old I thought I understood disappointment. I'd buried my wife, watched friends pass on, and felt the slow ache of a body that no longer moved like it used to. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day my son would break my heart so completely that I'd have to choose between my love for him and my own dignity. It started on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember because the maple tree outside my kitchen window had just begun turning that brilliant shade of orange that reminded me so much of Catherine's favorite scarf. I was sitting at the same oak table where I'd eaten breakfast for 42 years, reading the newspaper and sipping coffee from the mug my grandson had made me in pottery class 3 Christmases ago. The house was quiet, the kind of peaceful quiet that comes when you've lived somewhere long enough that every creak and settling sound becomes familiar music. This wasn't just any house. This was the home Catherine and I had bought when we were newlyweds, young and foolish and so in love we thought we could conquer the world with nothing but determination and each other. We purchased it for $12,000 in 1975, and everyone told us we were crazy. It was a fixer-upper in what they called a transitional neighborhood, which was polite talk for rundown. The roof leaked, the plumbing was questionable, and the electrical system was older than both of us combined. But Catherine saw something in those weathered walls that I learned to see too. She saw home. Over the next 4 decades, we poured everything we had into that place. Every weekend, every vacation day, every spare dollar went into making it ours. I learned to tile and paint and fix pipes. Catherine learned to refinish furniture and plant gardens that would make the neighbors stop their cars just to admire her roses. We weren't wealthy people. I worked at the railroad, and she taught elementary school, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. By the time Catherine passed 5 years ago, our little transitional neighborhood had become one of the most sought-after areas in the city. The house we bought for $12,000 was worth close to $800,000, and that wasn't even counting what I'd hidden away over the years. You see, I'd always been what Catherine called cautiously optimistic about money. Growing up during harder times had taught me to save what I could when I could. Over 47 years of marriage, I'd managed to put away money here and there, some in certificates of deposit, some in bonds, some in a safety deposit box downtown. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, steady accumulation of a man who knew the value of a dollar and the importance of preparing for tomorrow. By my calculations, between the house value and my various savings, Catherine and I had managed to accumulate just over $1 million. Not bad for a railroad man and a school teacher who'd never made more than $50,000 a year between us. After Catherine died, I'd simplified things. I sold off most of my investments and had the money converted to cash, which I stored in waterproof containers throughout the house. Call it old-fashioned, but I'd lived through enough economic uncertainty to trust walls more than banks. The money was carefully distributed, some behind the water heater in the basement, some in hollowed spaces I'd created in the attic, some sealed behind false panels I'd installed in the bedroom closets. Only Catherine had known about our little treasure hunt, and when she passed, I became the sole keeper of our life's work. Always planned to leave everything to our son, Bennett. He was our only child, born when we'd been married 10 years and had nearly given up hope of having children. He'd been our miracle baby, and even though he was now 45 years old with children of his own, he'd always be my little boy in some corner of my heart. But Bennett had been struggling for the past few years. What started as prescription pain medication after a back injury had slowly morphed into something darker, something that changed him from the thoughtful, responsible man we'd raised into someone I barely recognized. Catherine had died before the worst of it hit, and sometimes I was grateful she didn't have to see what our son had become. The addiction had cost him his marriage, his job, and his relationship with his 2 children, my grandchildren, whom I rarely saw anymore because Bennett's ex-wife, understandably, didn't trust him around them unsupervised. I tried to help, had paid for 2 different rehabilitation programs, had given him money for rent and groceries and utilities more times than I could count, but nothing seemed to stick. Every time I thought he was getting better, something would happen, and we'd be right back where we started. That Tuesday morning, Bennett showed up at my door looking worse than I'd seen him in months. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, his hair unwashed, and there was a wildness in his eyes that made my stomach clench with worry. But he was still my son, so I invited him in and offered him coffee. "Dad," he said, not bothering to sit down, "I need to talk to you about something important." I gestured toward the kitchen table, the same one where we'd had so many conversations over the years about school troubles and girlfriend problems and career decisions and all the 1,000 little crises that make up a life. "Of course, son, sit down, tell me what's on your mind." But he didn't sit. Instead, he started pacing around my small kitchen like a caged animal, his hands shaking slightly as he ran them through his unwashed hair. "Dad, I need money, a lot of money." Need it today. My heart sank. We'd been down this road so many times before. Bennett, you know I'll help you however I can, but no, he cut me off, his voice sharp. Not help, not a loan, not a handout. I need serious money, and I need it now. I studied his face, trying to read the desperation I saw there. How much are we talking about? $50,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. In all our previous conversations about money, the amounts had been measured in hundreds or at most thousands. This was something else entirely. Bennett, I said carefully, that's a lot of money. What's this about? His pacing became more agitated and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I can't explain everything right now, but I'm in trouble, Dad, real trouble, and if I don't get this money by tonight, something very bad is going to happen. Every paternal instinct I had was screaming at me to ask more questions, to demand explanations, to try to understand what kind of trouble required $50,000. But I'd learned over the years that pushing Bennett when he was in this state usually just made things worse. Son, I don't have $50,000 just sitting around, I said, which was technically true. While I had much more than that hidden throughout the house, it wasn't like I could just write a check for that amount. Bennett stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disbelief and something that looked almost like contempt. What do you mean you don't have it? I mean exactly what I said. I'm living on Social Security and your mother's pension. I don't have that kind of money. But you have the house, he said, his voice taking on a calculating tone that chilled me. This house has to be worth something. I nodded slowly. Yes, the house has value, but Bennett, this is my... I can't just... You could take out a home equity loan, he interrupted. Or better yet, you could sell it, Dad. You're 73 years old. What do you need with all this space? You could sell this place, give me what I need, and use the rest to move into one of those nice senior communities. It would probably be better for you anyway. A casual way he suggested dismantling my entire life, selling the home I'd built with his mother, moving me into what he clearly saw as some kind of waiting room for death that took my breath away. But I tried to stay calm. Bennett, this house is my home. It's where your mother and I built our life together. It's where you grew up. I can't just sell it because you need money. His face darkened, and for a moment he looked like a stranger. Can't or won't. Bennett, please, sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. Maybe there's another way to handle whatever trouble you're in. Maybe we can call someone, get some help. I don't need help, he snapped. I need money, and you're sitting here in this. He gestured around the kitchen with obvious disdain. In this old shack, being selfish. Old shack. The words hit me harder than I expected. This house that Catherine and I had lovingly restored, had filled with 47 years of memories, had transformed from a rundown property into a beautiful home. He was calling it an old shack, but I didn't argue. I didn't defend the house or list all the improvements we'd made or point out how much the property had appreciated over the years. I just sat there feeling something cold and final settling in my chest. Dad, you're going to die in a few years anyway, Bennett continued, apparently not noticing my silence. What's the point of hanging on to all this stuff? At least if you sell now, the money could actually do some good. It could save my life, save his life. Even through my hurt, I heard the desperation in those words, and it made me want to find a way to help him. But $50,000 for mysterious trouble, combined with his casual dismissal of everything I held. Dear made me pause. What kind of trouble are you in, son? I asked quietly. He looked away, and I saw his jaw clench. The kind that gets people hurt if they don't pay what they owe. My blood went cold. Bennett, are you telling me you owe money to dangerous people? I'm telling you that I need $50,000 by tonight, and my father, who claims to love me, is sitting in his worthless old house telling me he can't help. Worthless old house. There it was again, this dismissal of everything Catherine and I had built together. And this time I heard something else in his voice, not just desperation, but entitlement, as if I owed him this money, as if my life's work was somehow less important than his immediate needs. I looked around the kitchen, seeing it suddenly through his eyes. The cabinets Catherine and I had painted and repainted over the years until we got the color just right. The countertops we'd saved for 2 years to replace. The window over the sink where she used to stand washing dishes and humming softly to herself. To Bennett, it was all just an old shack, worthless. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Time. Bennett's voice rose. Dad, I told you I need this money today, tonight. There is no time. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got into whatever situation you're in, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Bennett stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The desperation was still there, but now it was mixed with something uglier: resentment, anger, and what looked like genuine hatred. Fine, he said, his voice cold. If that's how you want to play it, old man, then fine, but don't expect me to feel sorry for you when you're sitting here alone in your precious shack waiting to die. And with that, he walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he left, staring at the coffee mug my grandson had made me, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my only child, the miracle baby Catherine and I had prayed for, had just called my home worthless and basically told me I should sell everything I held dear to solve his problems. But what hurt even more was the realization that he didn't see me as a person with my own life, my own needs, my own right to dignity in my golden years. To him, I was just an obstacle between him and money he felt entitled to. An old man in an old shack, too selfish to do what he thought was right. Over the next few hours I found myself walking through the house, touching things Catherine and I had chosen together, remembering the stories behind each room, each piece of furniture, each carefully hung picture. This wasn't just a house, it was a museum of our love, a testament to a life well lived together. I thought about Bennett's words about how he saw my life now, worthless, an old shack, a waiting room for death, and slowly a terrible calm settled over me. If that's how he saw my life, my home, my worth as a human being, then maybe it was time to accept his verdict. Maybe it was time to stop trying to convince someone who clearly didn't want to be convinced. That evening, Bennett came back. I heard his car in the driveway, heard his footsteps on the porch, and for a moment I hoped he'd come to apologize. Maybe he'd realized how cruel his words had been. Maybe we could find another way to help him with whatever trouble he was in. But when I opened the door, I saw immediately that nothing had changed. If anything, he looked more desperate, more dangerous. "Dad, I've been thinking," he said, pushing past me into the living room. "You don't have to move into a senior community. You could rent a nice apartment somewhere, something small and easy to maintain, but I need you to put the house on the market tomorrow." I stared at him. "Bennett, I told you I don't have time for this nonsense," he snapped. "Dad, you're being ridiculous. You're an old man living alone in a house that's way too big for you. It makes sense to sell, and right now I need the money more than you need to keep playing house with Mom's ghost." Playing house with Mom's ghost. The cruelty of that phrase took my breath away. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about him completely dismissing the life Catherine and I had built, reducing our 47 years of marriage to some kind of pathetic game. "Bennett," I said quietly, "you're talking about my home, you're talking about my life." "I'm talking about being practical," he said. "Dad, you could die tomorrow. What happens to this place then? It'll just sit here empty until I have to deal with selling it anyway. At least this way you can help me when I need it most, not when we could work together to solve his problems, when he needed it most, as if my entire existence was supposed to revolve around his needs." I found myself studying his face, looking for some trace of the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him just one more story. The teenager who used to help me work on the car in the garage, who'd listen patiently while I explained how engines worked. The young man who'd brought Catherine flowers on Mother's Day and had cried when I taught him to dance before his wedding. But that person seemed to be gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to getting what he wanted. "What if I said no?" I asked. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, you're not going to say no, because at the end of the day, I'm all you have left. When you get sick, when you can't take care of yourself anymore, who do you think is going to be there for you? And do you really want to risk that relationship over some stubborn attachment to a bunch of old wood and brick?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Help him now, or face my declining years alone. And suddenly I understood that this wasn't really about $50,000 at all. This was about power, about him believing he had the right to dictate the terms of my life because I was old and alone and in his mind dependent on him. But he was wrong about me being dependent on him. Over the past 5 years since Catherine's death, I'd built a life for myself. I had friends at the senior center, neighbors who checked on me, a routine that kept me healthy and engaged with the world. I didn't need Bennett to take care of me. I'd been taking care of myself just fine. What I'd needed was his love, his respect, his acknowledgement that I was still a person with worth and dignity and the right to make my own decisions. And apparently that was too much to ask for. "I need to think about this," I said again, Bennett's face flushed with anger. "There's nothing to think about, Dad. Either you help me or you don't. Either you act like a father who loves his son or you act like a selfish old man who cares more about things than people." Selfish old man, another knife to add to the collection he'd already planted in my heart. "I've given you money before," I said quietly. "Many times, for rehab, for rent, for groceries. I've never said no when you truly needed help. This is different," he said. "This isn't about rent money or rehab. This is about my life. These people I owe money to, they're not going to wait around while you have your feelings hurt about selling a house." "What people, Bennett? Who do you owe money to?" He looked away, and I saw his hands start to shake again. "It doesn't matter who. What matters is that they want their money, and they want it now." And suddenly I understood something that chilled me to the bone. This wouldn't be the last time. Even if I gave him $50,000 today, even if I sold my house and handed him hundreds of thousands more, it wouldn't be enough. Because addiction doesn't work that way. The people he owed money to today would be replaced by new people he owed money to tomorrow. And eventually he'd be back, demanding that I sacrifice something else, asking me to give up some other piece of my life to fund his destruction. The house would be gone. Then the money from the house would be gone. Then he'd want whatever else I had, my small savings account, my life insurance policy, maybe even my social security checks. And each time he'd make it sound like I was the unreasonable one for hesitating. Each time he'd paint himself as the victim and me as the selfish obstacle to his survival. I looked around the living room where Catherine and I used to sit together in the evenings, her reading her mystery novels while I worked crossword puzzles, the television playing softly in the background. this room where we'd celebrated Bennett's achievements and comforted him through his disappointments. This room where she'd taken her last breath, holding my hand and telling me she loved me. And I realized that if I gave in now, if I let Bennett reduce this sacred space to nothing more than a commodity to be sold for his immediate needs, I'd be betraying everything Catherine and I had built together. I'd be letting him turn our life's work into nothing more than drug money. No, I said quietly. Bennett froze. What? No, I repeated, my voice stronger this time. I won't sell my house. For a moment he just stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then his face darkened with an anger I'd never seen from him before. Are you kidding me right now? He said, his voice rising. Dad, I just explained to you that my life is in danger and you're worried about your house. I'm worried about my home, I corrected. And I'm worried about my son, but not in the way you want me to be. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words I spoke would change our relationship forever. It means that giving you $50,000 won't solve your problems, Bennett. It'll just postpone them, and I won't destroy everything your mother and I built together to fund your addiction. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. We danced around it for years, calling it a problem or a situation or Bennett's struggles, but I'd finally said it out loud. Addiction. Bennett's face went white, then red, then white again. How dare you, he whispered. How dare you stand there and judge me when you have no idea what I'm going through? I know exactly what you're going through, I said. I've been watching it destroy you for 3 years. I've paid for rehab twice. I've given you money for rent and food and utilities. I've lied to your children's mother about why you missed their birthdays. I've made excuses for you to friends and neighbors and anyone else who asks where you've been. Don't tell me I don't know what you're going through. Then help me, he pleaded, and for a moment I heard the little boy again. Dad, please, just this once. I swear this will be the last time. You said that last time, I reminded him, and the time before that. This is different. No, it's not, I interrupted. Bennett, I love you, I will always love you, but I won't enable you anymore, and I won't let you tear down everything good in my life because you can't deal with your problems. He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched as hurt gave way to anger, and anger gave way to something cold and calculating. Fine, he said finally. If that's your decision, then you'll have to live with the consequences. What consequences? Bennett smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well, Dad, if you won't sell the house willingly, I guess we'll have to find another way. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you're 73 years old, living alone in a big house, obviously not thinking. Clearly, I mean, what kind of rational person chooses a building over their own son's life? The threat was clear now, and it terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Bennett, you can't be serious. I'm dead serious, Dad. You want to play hardball. Fine. But remember, I'm the one who will be making decisions about your care when you can't make them for yourself. I'm the one who will inherit everything when you die anyway. You can make this easy or you can make it hard, but either way I'm going to get what I need. And there it was, the final blow. Not only did he see me as nothing more than an obstacle to getting money, but he was actually threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't comply. He was threatening to take away not just my home, but my autonomy, my dignity, my basic human rights. I sat down heavily in Catherine's chair, feeling every one of my 73 years. This was my son. The baby I'd walked the floor with when he had colic, the toddler I'd taught to ride a bike, the young man I'd been so proud of when he graduated from college and got his first job and got married and gave me grandchildren. And now he was standing in my living room, threatening to destroy me if I didn't fund his addiction. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, get out of my house. My voice was stronger now, fueled by an anger I'd been suppressing for too long. Get out and don't come back until you're ready to have a conversation like a civilized human being. Bennett's face twisted with rage. This isn't over, old man. You think you can just dismiss me like some kind of servant. I'm your son, and whether you like it or not, your future is in my hands. My future is in my own hands, I said, standing up to face him. And right now, my future doesn't include someone who threatens me in my own home. He stormed toward the door, then turned back for one final shot. Enjoy your precious house, Dad, because when I'm done, it's all you'll have left. The door slammed behind him hard enough to shake the pictures on the walls, and suddenly the house was quiet again. But this time the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt ominous. I sat back down and tried to process what had just happened. My son, my only child, had just threatened to have me declared incompetent and potentially force me into some kind of care facility if I didn't give him $50,000 to pay off drug dealers. The worst part was that he might actually be able to do it. I'd heard horror stories about elderly people being railroaded by family members who wanted control of their assets. Courts that assumed old age meant incompetence. Doctors who could be convinced that an elderly person living alone was inherently unsafe. But as I sat there in Catherine's chair, looking around the living room we'd furnished together over 4 decades, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid. Oh, I was hurt. I was heartbroken. I was disappointed beyond words. But I wasn't afraid of Bennett or his threats, because for the first time in years I could see the situation clearly. This wasn't about love or family or helping someone in need. This was about manipulation and entitlement and an addict who had decided that everyone else's life was expendable if it served his needs, and I didn't have to participate in my own destruction. Over the next few days, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made plans that had nothing to do with Bennett's problems. First, I called my attorney, the same man who'd handled Catherine's will and had been encouraging me for months to update my own estate planning. I made an appointment for the following week and began gathering all my financial documents. Then I called Dr. Morrison, my physician, and scheduled a complete physical with cognitive testing. If Bennett was planning to challenge my mental competency, I wanted current medical documentation that I was thinking clearly and making rational decisions. I also reached out to some old friends I'd been neglecting, people who tried to maintain contact after Catherine's death but whom I'd gradually shut out as I became more focused on trying to fix Bennett's problems. It felt good to reconnect, to be reminded that I had a life and relationships that existed independently of my son's crises. But most importantly, I spent time really thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. For 3 years, ever since Bennett's addiction had become undeniable, I'd been living in a constant state of crisis management. Always waiting for the next emergency phone call, always bracing for the next request for money, always hoping that this time would be different. I was tired of living that way. At 73, I didn't have unlimited time left, and I didn't want to spend whatever years I had remaining serving as Bennett's personal ATM while he insulted everything I held dear. A week passed without any contact from Bennett, and I began to hope that maybe he'd found another solution to his problems. Maybe he'd gotten help. Maybe he'd realized how hurtful his words had been and was working up the courage to apologize. I should have known better. On a Thursday morning, I was in the garden pulling weeds from Catherine's rose bed when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I looked up expecting to see Bennett, but instead I saw a young woman I didn't recognize walking toward my front door. She was well-dressed and professional-looking, carrying a briefcase and what appeared to be some kind of official documents. My first thought was that she might be selling insurance or investment services, the kind of person who targeted elderly homeowners with promises of financial security. But when I met her at the front door, her first words chilled me to the bone. "Mr. Harold Winters, I'm Rebecca Chen from Adult Protective Services. I need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your welfare and living situation." Adult Protective Services. Bennett had actually done it. He'd reported me to authorities as some kind of a Trisk elder who couldn't take care of himself. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ms. Chen consulted her paperwork. We received a report from a family member indicating that you may be living in unsafe conditions, that you may be experiencing cognitive decline, and that you may be making decisions that put your health and safety at risk." Bennett's fingerprints were all over this. Living in unsafe conditions, probably referring to my choice to remain in my old shack. Cognitive decline, because what rational person would refuse to give their addicted son $50,000? Making risky decisions like choosing to maintain my independence instead of moving into supervised care. "May I ask who made this report?" I said, though I already knew the answer. "I'm not at liberty to share that information, but I can tell you it was someone who claims to be concerned about your well-being," Ms. Chen said. "May I come in and take a look around?" I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her that my son was a drug addict who was trying to manipulate the system to get access to my assets. But I also knew that refusing to cooperate would only make me look more suspicious, more like the confused, defensive, elderly person Bennett was trying to paint me as. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. Ms. Chen spent the next hour walking through my house, making notes about everything she saw. She checked my refrigerator to make sure I had adequate food. She looked at my bathroom to see if I had grab bars and non-slip surfaces. She asked about my medications, my doctor visits, my social contacts, my daily routine. To my relief, everything she found seemed to reassure her that I was taking good care of myself. The house was clean and well-maintained. My refrigerator was stocked with healthy food. I had a weekly pill organizer with all my medications properly sorted. I could answer all her questions about my daily routine clearly and coherently. "Mr. Winters," she said finally, "I have to say you seem to be managing very well on your own. Your home is in excellent condition, you appear to be in good health, and you're clearly thinking clearly." "Thank you," I said. "May I ask what specific concerns were raised in the report?" Ms. Chen hesitated, then seemed to decide there was no harm in sharing some general information. "The person who called said you were living alone in a house that was too big and potentially dangerous for someone your age. They also suggested that you might be making poor financial decisions and refusing help from family members." Poor financial decisions, refusing help from family members. Bennett had managed to frame his attempt to steal my house as concern for my welfare. "Ms. Chen," I said carefully, "I think I know who made this report, and I think you should know that this person has been asking me for a very large sum of money." When I refused to give it to them, they became quite angry and made some threats. Her expression sharpened with interest. What kind of threats? I told her about Bennett's demand for $50,000, his insistence that I sell my house, and his explicit threat to have me declared incompetent if I didn't comply. I watched her face grow more serious as I spoke. "Mr. Winters, do you feel safe in your home?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Did I feel safe? Physically, yes. Bennett might be desperate, but I didn't think he'd actually hurt me. But emotionally, psychologically, no, I didn't feel safe at all. I felt like I was under siege by someone who was supposed to love and protect me. "I feel safe from physical harm," I said finally. "But I'm concerned about what other steps this person might take if they don't get what they want." Ms. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Winters, I want you to know that based on what I've observed today, you clearly don't meet any criteria for protective intervention. You're competent, you're taking good care of yourself, and you have every right to make your own decisions about your living situation and your finances." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. However," she continued, "I'm concerned about these threats you've described. Financial exploitation of elderly people by family members is unfortunately quite common, and what you're describing sounds like it could escalate." She gave me some pamphlets about elder abuse and financial exploitation, along with contact information for legal resources and support services. But most importantly, she documented everything in her report, creating an official record of Bennett's attempt to use the system against me. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and realized that something fundamental had shifted. Bennett's attempt to have me declared incompetent had failed spectacularly. In fact, it had backfired by creating official documentation of his threats and manipulation attempts. But more than that, seeing the situation through an outsider's eyes had helped me understand just how twisted things had become. A trained professional who specialized in elder abuse had looked at Bennett's behavior and immediately recognized it as potential exploitation, not loving concern. That evening, I called my attorney and moved up our appointment. It was time to make some serious changes to my estate planning. The next day, Bennett showed up at my door again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He was with a woman I recognized as his ex-wife, Patricia, and my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Christopher. I hadn't seen the kids in over 6 months, and my heart ached at how much they'd grown. Emma was 12 now, tall and serious like her mother, while 10-year-old Christopher still had the sweet, open face that reminded me so much of Bennett at that age. "Grandpa," Christopher ran to me for a hug, and for a moment, all the pain and anger of the past weeks melted away. This was what family was supposed to feel like, but then I looked over his head and saw Bennett's calculating expression, and I understood what was happening. He was using my grandchildren as leverage, bringing them here to make it harder for me to refuse whatever new demand he was about to make. "Harold," Patricia said, her voice carefully neutral. "Bennett said you two had some kind of disagreement, and he thought maybe if we all talked together, we could work things out." I studied her face, trying to read what she really knew about the situation. Patricia was a good woman, practical, honest, and fiercely protective of her children. She divorced Bennett when his addiction became dangerous for the family, but she never tried to turn the children against their father or keep them from seeing me. If she was here, it was probably because Bennett had fed her some version of events that cast him as the reasonable one and me as the stubborn, unreasonable old man who was refusing to help his struggling son. "Of course," I said. "Come in, all of you." We gathered in the living room, the children automatically gravitating toward the toy box I still kept in the corner, a remnant from when they used to visit regularly. Watching them play with the same toys Bennett had once played with, I felt the weight of broken traditions, lost connections, and a family that was slowly disintegrating. "Grandpa," Emma said, looking up from the puzzle she was working on, "Dad says you might have to move to a different house." My heart clenched. Even my 12-year-old granddaughter had been drawn into this mess. "What do you think about that, sweetheart?" He considered the question seriously. "I don't want you to move. I like this house. It has all the pictures of Grandma, and it smells like her cookies." Out of the mouths of babes, my granddaughter had just articulated what Bennett couldn't, or wouldn't understand: that this house wasn't just a building, it was a repository of family history, a connection to the people we'd loved and lost. "Harold," Patricia said gently, "Bennett explained that you're having some financial difficulties, and he's worried about you managing such a large house on your own." Financial difficulties. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I had over $1 million hidden throughout this house, and my son had convinced his ex-wife that I was having money problems. "What exactly did Bennett tell you?" I asked. Patricia glanced at Bennett, who nodded encouragingly. "He said you need money for some unexpected expenses, and he suggested that it might make sense to sell the house and move somewhere smaller and easier to maintain. He said he could help you find a nice apartment or maybe a senior community where you'd have more support." I looked at Bennett, marveling at his ability to twist the truth. He'd managed to completely reverse our situation, making himself look like the caring son who was trying to help his struggling father, while painting me as the prideful old man who was too stubborn to accept reasonable assistance. And what did you think of that suggestion? I asked Patricia. She shifted uncomfortably. Well, it's not really my place to have an opinion about your living situation, but I know Bennett cares about you, and if you're having trouble keeping up with the house. I'm not having trouble keeping up with the house, I said clearly. In fact, I'm not having any financial difficulties at all. Bennett's face flushed. Dad, you don't have to put on a brave front. Patricia understands that sometimes older people need help making practical decisions. Practical decisions. There was that phrase again, the one that made it sound like I was incapable of rational thought. I looked at my grandchildren, both of whom had stopped playing and were watching the adults with the kind of alert concern that children develop when they sense family tension. They'd already lived through their parents' divorce, already dealt with the disruption of their father's addiction. Now they were being exposed to whatever this was. Kids, I said, why don't you go out to the kitchen and see if you can find some cookies in the pantry? I think there might be some of those chocolate chip ones you like. They scrambled up eagerly, and I waited until I heard them rummaging around in the kitchen before I spoke again. Patricia, I said, I need you to understand what's really happening here. Bennett didn't come to me because he was worried about my financial situation. He came to me demanding $50,000 in cash, and when I asked him what it was for, he told me he owed money to dangerous people. I watched her face change as the implications sank in. She'd lived with Bennett's addiction for years before finally leaving. She knew exactly what kind of dangerous people he might owe money to. When I told him I couldn't give him that much money on short notice, I continued, he told me I should sell my house and give him the proceeds. He called this place an old shack and worthless and suggested I was being selfish by not liquidating everything I owned to solve his problems. Patricia's eyes went to Bennett, who was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched. Harold, she said slowly, is that true? It's more complicated than that, Bennett muttered. How is it more complicated? I asked, either you demanded $50,000 for drug debts or you didn't. Either you called my home worthless and threatened to have me declared incompetent if I didn't sell it, or you didn't. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. From the kitchen I could hear Emma and Christopher chattering happily as they found the cookies, blissfully unaware that their family was imploding in the next room. Finally, Patricia spoke. Bennett, please tell me you didn't actually ask your father to sell his house to pay your debts. It's not that simple, Bennett started. It's exactly that simple, Patricia cut him off, her voice sharp with the anger I'd rarely heard from her. This is exactly the kind of thing we talked about in counseling. This is exactly why I couldn't stay married to you. She turned to me, her expression stricken. Harold, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Bennett told me you called him asking for help with some financial problems, and he was trying to find solutions. He told you I called him. I couldn't hide my disbelief. He said you were too proud to ask directly, but he could tell you were struggling, Patricia said, then looked at Bennett with disgust, which was obviously complete manipulation. Bennett finally looked up, and I saw desperation mixed with defiance in his expression. You don't understand the situation I'm in, he said. These aren't people who accept payment plans. This isn't something I can just work out over time. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got involved with these people, Patricia snapped. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to drag your children into this mess. I didn't drag anyone into anything, Bennett protested. I just thought if we all talked together. You thought you could use Emma and Christopher to guilt your father into giving you money, Patricia finished. Just like you tried to use them to guilt me into taking you back last year. The pieces were falling into place for me. This wasn't the first time Bennett had used emotional manipulation involving the children to try to get what he wanted. Patricia had seen this pattern before. Kids, I called toward the kitchen. Come say goodbye to your dad. Your mom needs to take you home. Emma and Christopher came back into the living room, chocolate chip crumbs on their shirts, looking confused by the sudden tension in the room. Are we leaving already? Christopher asked. But we just got here. Yes, sweetheart, Patricia said, her voice gentle despite the anger I could see in her eyes. We need to go, but you'll see Grandpa again soon. As they gathered their things, Emma approached me with the serious expression she got when she was trying to understand adult problems. Grandpa, she said quietly, are you okay? The simple question, asked with such genuine concern by my 12-year-old granddaughter, nearly broke my heart. When had I become someone people worried about? When had my life become so complicated that children had to wonder if I was okay? I'm fine, sweetheart, I assured her, pulling her into a hug. Grandpa is just fine, promise, promise. After Patricia and the children left, Bennett and I were alone again, but this time the dynamic had shifted completely. His attempt to manipulate the situation by bringing the family had not only failed, but it had exposed his behavior to his ex-wife, someone whose opinion he still cared about. Dad, he said, his voice smaller than before, I know how this looked, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that you're so desperate for drug money that you're willing to lie to your ex-wife and manipulate your children to try to pressure me into selling my home. It's not drug money, he protested weakly. What is it then? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I borrowed money to buy drugs. And when I couldn't pay it back, I borrowed more money from someone else to pay the first person. And when I couldn't pay that back, you got involved with loan sharks, I finished. He nodded miserably. It started small, just a few $100s, but the interest rates, the penalties when you miss payments, it adds up so fast, Dad, and these people, they don't care that I'm trying to get clean. They don't care about anything except getting their money. For a moment, looking at my son's defeated posture, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. This was the addiction talking, the disease that had taken my bright, capable son and turned him into someone who made increasingly desperate choices. But then I remembered his words from the previous week. Old Shaq, worthless, playing house with Mom's ghost, the threat to have me declared incompetent, the way he'd tried to manipulate Patricia and the children. Addiction might explain his behavior, but it didn't excuse it. And it certainly didn't obligate me to destroy my own life to enable his continued destruction. Bennett, I said carefully, I'm willing to pay for rehab again. I'm willing to help you find a treatment program, even if it means going out of state or into a long-term facility. But I won't give you $50,000 to pay off drug dealers. Dad, you don't understand. They're not going to wait for me to get clean. They want their money now. Then maybe it's time to consider other options. What other options? I took a deep breath, knowing he wasn't going to like what I was about to suggest. Maybe it's time to go to the police. Bennett's face went white. Are you insane? You can't go to the police about people like this. That's how you get hurt. That's how other people get hurt. Other people like who? He looked away, and my blood ran cold as I understood what he was implying. Bennett, are you telling me that these people have threatened me, or Patricia, or the children? Not directly, he said quickly, but they know about you, they know about the kids, and if something happens to me. The threat was clear, and it terrified me more than anything he'd said so far. Not only was Bennett asking me to sell my house to pay his drug debts, but he was suggesting that if I didn't, dangerous people might come after me or my grandchildren. How do they know about us? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Bennett couldn't meet my eyes. When I was trying to convince them to give me more time, I might have mentioned that I had family who could help if I needed them to. You used us as collateral, I said, the full horror of the situation becoming clear. You told loan sharks that your family had money and now they're expecting us to pay your debts. It's not like that, it's exactly like that, I exploded, my carefully maintained calm finally cracking. Bennett, do you have any idea what you've done? You've put your children at risk. You've put their mother at risk, you've put me at risk, also you could get money for drugs. I never meant for it to go this far, he said desperately. I thought I could get the money and pay them back before anyone got hurt. By destroying everything your mother and I worked for our entire lives. Dad, please, I know I've screwed up. I know I've said terrible things and made awful choices, but if you don't help me now, people are going to get hurt. Real people, people we both love. And there it was, the ultimate manipulation. Not only was I supposed to sacrifice my home and my life savings for his addiction, but now he was telling me that if I didn't, my grandchildren might be in danger. I stared at my son for a long moment, trying to reconcile this desperate, manipulative stranger with the little boy I'd raised. Somewhere along the way, the addiction had consumed not just his physical health and his career and his marriage, but his fundamental decency as a human being. He'd become someone who would put children at risk to get drug money. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, get out of my house now. You can't just, I can and I will, I said, my voice growing stronger. Bennett, I love you, I will always love you, but I will not be threatened in my own home and I will not have my grandchildren put in danger because of your choices. If something happens to me, he started, then that will be the consequence of the choices you've made. Interrupted, but I will not enable this behavior anymore. I will not sacrifice everything good in my life to fund your addiction, and I will not reward you for threatening the people I love. Bennett stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Clearly, he'd expected the mention of the children being in potential danger to immediately bring me to heel. He'd expected me to panic, to agree to anything to keep them safe, and part of me did want to panic. Part of me wanted to liquidate everything I owned and hand it over to whoever these dangerous people were, just to make sure Emma and Christopher were never at risk. But I'd lived long enough to recognize manipulation when I saw it, even when it came wrapped in legitimate fear. Bennett might genuinely believe that these people posed a threat to the family, but he'd created that threat through his own actions. And giving in to it would only teach him that threatening the people I loved was an effective way to get what he wanted. Dad, you're making a mistake, Bennett said, his voice taking on a cold edge I'd never heard before. You think you can just dismiss me, but you need me more than I need you. You're an old man living alone. What happens when you get sick? What happens when you can't take care of yourself anymore? There it was again, the threat about my future care, the implication that my well-being depended on maintaining his approval. Bennett, I've been taking care of myself just fine for 5 years since your mother died. I have friends, I have doctors, I have resources you apparently don't even know about. What I don't have anymore is tolerance for being threatened and manipulated by my own son. Something shifted in Bennett's expression, and for a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe he was realizing that his threats weren't working. Maybe he was starting to understand that he'd pushed too hard and gone too far, or maybe he was just getting more desperate. You know what, old man? He said his voice dripping with contempt. Keep your precious house, keep your memories of mom, keep your pathetic little life, but don't come crying to me when you realize you've got nothing left but empty rooms and old photographs. He headed for the door, then turned back for one final shot. And when those people I owe money to figure out that you're not going to help, don't expect me to protect you. You want to handle this on your own? Fine, handle it. The door slammed behind him, and once again I was alone in the house that had become the center of this entire conflict. But this time, instead of hurt or fear, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For 3 years, I've been living my life around Bennett's crises, always waiting for the next emergency, always bracing for the next impossible demand. I'd been so focused on trying to save him that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have peace in my own home. Now, for the first time since his addiction had begun, I had clarity. I could see the situation for what it really was, not a son asking his father for help, but an addict using every tool of emotional manipulation available to fund his continued destruction, and I was done with it. Over the next few days, I followed through on the plans I'd been making. I met with my attorney and completely rewrote my will, removing Bennett as a beneficiary and instead leaving everything to a trust for Emma and Christopher's education, with Patricia as the trustee. I also set up a smaller fund to be donated to drug treatment programs, not because I thought it would help Bennett, but because I hoped it might help other people's children avoid his fate. I had my cognitive assessment done, scoring well above average for my age group, and I requested copies of all the documentation for my files. If Bennett tried again to have me declared incompetent, I had recent medical evidence that I was thinking clearly and making rational decisions. Most importantly, I called the police and reported Bennett's threats, as well as his claims that loan sharks might target family members. The detective I spoke with took the report seriously and advised me on steps I could take to improve my personal security. I also reached out to Patricia and explained the potential threat to her and the children. She was understandably frightened, but she was also practical. She changed their daily routines, made sure the children's school knew not to release them to anyone but her, and temporarily moved in with her parents while she decided whether more drastic steps were necessary. Through all of this, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I was taking action instead of just reacting to Bennett's latest crisis. I was protecting myself and the people I loved instead of enabling someone who had demonstrated that he was willing to put us all at risk, but I also grieved. I grieved for the son I'd raised, the one who'd been kind and responsible and caring. I grieved for the grandchildren who were losing their father to addiction. I grieved for the family traditions that would never happen again, the holidays that would be shadowed by absence, the future I'd imagined that would never come to pass. 2 weeks after my final confrontation with Bennett, I was working in Catherine's garden when I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart jumped, wondering if it was Bennett coming back, or worse, if it was the dangerous people he claimed to owe money to, but when I looked up, I saw Patricia getting out of her car alone. "Harold," she called, "do you have a minute?" I set down my gardening tools and walked over to meet her. She looked tired and stressed, but not frightened, which I took as a good sign. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "As well as can be expected," she said. "The kids are confused about why we're staying with my parents, but they're adaptable. How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, and realized I meant it. "Have you heard from Bennett?" Her expression darkened. "He showed up at my parents' house yesterday, demanding to know why I'd turned against him. When I told him I hadn't turned against him, I just stopped enabling him. He got belligerent. My father had to ask him to leave." I sighed. "I'm sorry, Patricia. I never wanted you and the kids to get caught up in this." "You didn't catch us up in anything," she said firmly. "Bennett did, and actually that's why I'm here. I wanted to tell you something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Yesterday, after Bennett left my parents' house, he called me. He was crying and he sounded different, more like his old self, if that makes sense." "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry. Not just the usual 'I'm sorry I got caught' or 'I'm sorry you're upset,' but genuinely sorry for what he'd put everyone through. He said he realized he'd become someone he didn't recognize and he wanted to get help." My heart jumped with hope despite everything that had happened. "Did he mean it?" "I think so," Patricia said. "He asked me to give you this." She handed me the piece of paper, and I unfolded it to find a handwritten letter in Bennett's familiar scrawl. "Dad, asterisk, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to trust me. I don't even expect you to read this whole letter. But I need to say some things, even if it's too late for them to matter. Asterisk, you were right about everything. I am an addict. I have been using drugs and lying about it and manipulating everyone I love to support my addiction. I called your home worthless because I needed it to be worthless so I could justify asking you to sell it. I threatened to have you declared incompetent because I needed you to be incompetent so I could take control of your money. I brought Emma and Christopher to your house because I needed you to feel guilty enough to give me what I wanted. None of that was about love or concern or family. It was about drugs and getting money for drugs and the terrible things addiction makes you willing to do to the people who love you most. I know I put you at risk. I know I put Patricia and the kids at risk. The loan sharks I told you about are real, and they do know about our family, and they might actually try to collect from you if they can't collect from me. I'm sorry for that most of all. I never meant for my problems to become everyone else's problems, but that's what addiction does. It spreads like a disease until it infects everyone around you. I'm checking myself into a long-term treatment program today, not because I think you'll give me money if I get clean, but because I can't stand being the person I've become. I've already lost my marriage, my job, and my relationship with my children. I don't want to lose my soul too. I don't know if I'll ever be someone you can be proud of again. I don't know if I'll ever be someone Emma and Christopher can look up to. But I have to try because the alternative is becoming more of the monster I've already turned into. I love you, Dad. I love the house you and Mom built together. I love the life you two created and the values you tried to teach me. I'm sorry I threw all of that away for drugs. I'm sorry I tried to make you throw it away too. I won't contact you again unless you contact me first. You've earned the right to live in peace without worrying about what crisis I'm going to create next. If I do get better, if I do become someone worth having in your life again, I'll find a way to prove it to you. But until then, I'm going to leave you alone. I'm sorry for everything. Benetai read the letter twice, then looked up at Patricia. Do you think he means it? I think he means it right now, she said carefully. Whether he'll still mean it in a week or a month or a year, I don't know. But Harold, this is the first time in 3 years that he's taken responsibility for his actions without trying to blame someone else or make excuses. Where is he now? He's at a treatment facility upstate. Long-term residential program, at least 6 months, maybe longer. He used the last of his savings to pay for it. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, hope, relief, sadness, and a dozen others I couldn't name. This was what I'd been wanting for years. Bennett acknowledging his addiction, taking responsibility for his choices, seeking real help instead of just making promises he couldn't keep. But I'd also learned not to get my hopes up too high. I'd seen him make similar promises before, had watched him relapse after previous treatment attempts. Addiction was a disease, but it was also a series of choices, and Bennett had been making bad choices for a very long time. What about the people he owes money to? I asked. Patricia's expression grew troubled. That's actually the other reason I came to see you. Bennett gave me the name and contact information for his debts. He said if anything happened to him, I should give this information to the police. She handed me another piece of paper with names and phone numbers written in Bennett's handwriting. He also said, she hesitated. He said you should consider staying somewhere else for a while, just until he can figure out how to handle this situation. He's going to try to contact these people from the treatment center and work out some kind of payment plan, but until then, they might come looking for the family he used as collateral. I finished. Patricia nodded unhappily. I know it's not fair. I know none of this is your fault, but Harold, these are not the kind of people who care about fairness. I looked at the paper in my hand, at the names of people I'd never met who apparently considered me partially responsible for debts I'd never incurred. It was surreal, like being characters in a movie about someone else's life, but it was also clarifying, even if Bennett was sincere about getting help, even if he successfully completed treatment and managed to rebuild his life, the consequences of his actions would continue to ripple outward for a long time to come. His addiction hadn't just hurt him, it had created a web of problems that would affect all of us for months or years to come. I'm not going to be driven out of my own home by drug dealers, I said finally. Harold, Patricia, I'm 73 years old. I've lived in this house for 47 years. If I start running now, where does it end? Do I spend whatever time I have left looking over my shoulder, afraid of shadows, living in temporary housing because my son made bad choices? She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to live my life, I said. I'm going to take reasonable precautions. I've already talked to the police. I've improved my home security. I'm being more aware of my surroundings. But I'm not going to let fear make my decisions for me. If these people show up, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But Patricia, I've already lost 3 years of my life to Bennett's addiction. I've already let his problems consume my peace, my happiness, my sense of security in my own home. I won't lose any more time to fear of what might happen. Patricia studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I think I understand, and for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. You can't live your life around other people's threats. What about you and the kids? We'll stay with my parents for another few weeks, just until we see how this plays out. The kids think we're having an extended visit with Grandma and Grandpa, so they're actually enjoying themselves. After Patricia left, I sat in my kitchen and thought about everything that had happened over the past month. A month ago, I'd been a father worried about his son's addiction. Now I was a man who'd had to choose between his own dignity and his child's destruction. Who'd had to cut ties with his only child to protect himself from manipulation and threats. It wasn't the way I'd imagined my golden years would unfold. I thought Bennett and I would grow closer as we both aged, that he'd be someone I could depend on and who could depend on me. I'd imagined holidays with grandchildren, family traditions passed down through generations, a sense of continuity and connection that would comfort me in my final years. Instead, I was alone in a house that had become both my sanctuary and my fortress, wondering if dangerous strangers might show up at my door because my son had used my love for him as collateral for drug money, but I wasn't bitter. Somewhere in the midst of all the pain and disappointment and fear, I'd found something unexpected, peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I wasn't bracing for the next impossible demand. I wasn't trying to solve problems that couldn't be solved or save someone who didn't want to be saved. I was just living my life day by day, making my own choices and dealing with their consequences. It was lonely sometimes, but it was also liberating. 2 months later, I was pruning Catherine's roses when I heard a car in the driveway. But this time, instead of fear or anxiety, I felt only mild curiosity. I'd grown comfortable with the idea that I could handle whatever came my way. When I looked up, I was surprised to see Emma and Christopher climbing out of Patricia's car, both of them grinning and running toward me. "Grandpa," Christopher launched himself at me for a hug that nearly knocked me over. "Hey there, buddy," I said, holding him tight. "What are you two doing here?" "Mom said we could visit today," Emma said, more reserved but smiling. "She said you might want some help with the garden." I looked over their heads at Patricia, who was approaching more slowly. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "We haven't heard anything from Bennett's creditors in 6 weeks. The police think they've either written off the debt or found other ways to collect from Bennett directly through the treatment center. Either way, we think it's probably safe for the kids to visit again." "And how is Bennett doing?" Tricia's expression was cautiously optimistic. "Good, I think. He's been in the program for 2 months now, and his counselors say he's making real progress. He's not asking for money or making promises about getting out early. He's just working on himself." "That's good to hear. He asked me to tell you that he's not expecting anything from you," she continued. "No visits, no phone calls, no forgiveness. He said he just wants you to know that he's trying to become someone worthy of being your son again, even if it takes years." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the complicated mixture of love and disappointment and hope that came with thinking about Bennett. Maybe that's the best we can hope for right now. "Grandpa," Emma said, tugging on my sleeve, "can we go inside and see if you still have those photo albums from when Dad was little?" "Of course, sweetheart." As we walked toward the house, I realized something important had shifted. For months, this place had felt like a battleground, a fortress I had to defend against my own son's attacks. But with Emma and Christopher here, laughing and chattering about school and friends and all the normal things children should talk about, it felt like home again. That evening, after Patricia and the kids had gone, I sat in Catherine's chair and reflected on everything that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a father desperately trying to save his adult son from addiction, willing to sacrifice my own peace and security to help him. Now I was a man who'd learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and self-destruction. The house around me was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than I'd known during the worst of Bennett's crisis. This wasn't the tense silence of waiting for the next emergency call or the next impossible demand. This was the peaceful quiet of a life lived on my own terms, according to my own values, without the constant pressure of someone else's chaos. I thought about the money hidden throughout the house, over $1 million, that Bennett had never even suspected existed. Money that Catherine and I had saved penny by penny, dollar by dollar, over nearly 5 decades of marriage. Money that represented our dreams, our security, our legacy to the next generation. Bennett had called this house an old shack, had dismissed everything we'd built as worthless. He demanded that I liquidate our life's work to fund his addiction, and when I'd refused, he'd threatened to have me declared incompetent and forcibly removed from my own home. He'd never known that the worthless old shack he wanted me to sell contained enough hidden wealth to solve his immediate problems 10 times over. He'd never known that the selfish old man he'd berated and threatened was actually someone with significant resources who might have been willing to help if he'd approached the situation with respect and honesty instead of manipulation and cruelty. But his ignorance about my true financial situation had revealed something important about his character. He hadn't asked for help, he'd demanded submission. He hadn't presented a problem for us to solve together. He'd issued an ultimatum designed to strip me of everything I held dear. Even if I'd told him about the hidden money, even if I'd given him the $50,000 he demanded, it wouldn't have changed the fundamental dynamic between us. He'd still have seen me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, still have believed he had the right to make decisions about my life because I was old and he was younger. The addiction might have driven his desperation, but it hadn't created his willingness to manipulate and threaten the people who loved him. That came from somewhere deeper, from choices he'd made about what kind of person he wanted to be when things got difficult. Over the following months, I settled into a new rhythm of life. I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club at the senior center, and started volunteering at a local literacy program. I began taking better care of myself, not because someone was threatening to declare me incompetent if I didn't, but because I wanted to enjoy whatever years I had left. I also started the process of renovating parts of the house that Catherine and I had always talked about updating but never got around to. The kitchen got new appliances, The master bathroom got a walk-in shower with safety features, and I finally finished the basement workshop that I'd been planning for 20 years. Each improvement felt like a declaration. This was my home, I was staying here, and I was going to continue building and improving and investing in my own future regardless of what anyone else thought about my choices. Patricia brought the children to visit regularly, and slowly, we rebuilt the family traditions that had been disrupted by Bennett's addiction. Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday parties, all the normal rhythms of family life that had been held hostage by constant crisis for so long. Emma and Christopher never asked directly about their father's absence, but occasionally one of them would make a comment that showed they understood more than they let on. Christopher once told me that he was glad I didn't yell and break things anymore, apparently not realizing that it had been Bennett doing the yelling and breaking, not me. Emma, older and more perceptive, once asked if people could get better from being mean, and seemed satisfied when I told her that sometimes they could, if they worked very hard at it. A year after Bennett had entered treatment, Patricia called to tell me. He completed the residential program and was transitioning to a halfway house where he'd live while attending outpatient counseling and looking for work. He's different, she said. Not completely different, he's still Bennett, but there's a calmness about him that I haven't seen in years. He takes responsibility for things now instead of making excuses. He listens when people talk instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. That's good to hear, I said, and meant it. He asked me to tell you that he's not ready to contact you yet, Patricia continued. He said he wants to prove to himself that he can maintain his sobriety and rebuild his life before he asks you to trust him again. I respect that decision. But Harold, I think you should know he talks about you sometimes. About things you taught him when he was growing up, about projects you worked on together, about the kind of man he wants to become. You're still important to him, even if he can't show it right now. After she hung up, I found myself looking through the photo albums Emma had asked about during her last visit. Pictures of Bennett as a baby, as a toddler, as a young boy learning to ride his bike and catch a baseball and build a treehouse in the backyard. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and family vacations and all the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. In those pictures, I could see the man he'd been before addiction changed him. The boy who'd helped me paint the garage when he was 10, who'd spent hours in the basement workshop learning to use tools, who'd surprised Catherine on Mother's Day by planting a flower garden outside her kitchen window. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under years of bad choices and self-destruction, but maybe not lost forever. Maybe it was possible to come back from the place Bennett had gone. Maybe it was possible to rebuild trust and respect and love that had been shattered by addiction's cruel demands. I'd also learned not to base my happiness on someone else's recovery. Whether Bennett got better or not, whether he ever became someone I could have a relationship with again or not, I was going to be okay. I had built a life that didn't depend on his approval or his presence or his validation of my choices. 18 months after our final confrontation, on a crisp October morning that reminded me of the day Catherine and I had first looked at this house, I was raking leaves in the front yard when a familiar figure appeared at the end of my driveway. Bennett looked different, healthier, calmer, somehow both older and younger than when I'd last seen him. He was dressed neatly in clean work clothes, and he stood with his hands at his sides, not fidgeting or pacing the way he used to during his worst periods. "Hello, Dad," he said, not moving any closer. "Hello, Bennett." We looked at each other across the distance of the yard, two men who'd once been close and now felt like polite strangers. "I wasn't sure if you want to see me," he said. "I'm not sure either," I admitted. "But you're here, so I guess we'll find out." He smiled slightly at that, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the son I remembered from before everything went wrong. "I got a job," he said. "Construction work, mostly residential remodeling. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work, and I'm good at it." "That's good to hear. I've been clean for 20 months now," he continued. "I go to meetings every day, I work with a sponsor, I see a counselor twice a week. I know that doesn't make up for everything I put you through, but I wanted you to know." I nodded, unsure what to say. Part of me was proud of him for getting his life back on track. Part of me was still hurt by the things he'd said and done. Part of me was afraid to hope that this time might be different. "Dad, I owe you an apology," Bennett said. "Not just for asking you for money, but for the way I asked, for the things I said about you and Mom and this house, for the threats I made, for using Emma and Christopher as leverage, for putting all of you at risk because of my problems." I set down my rake and really looked at him. This was different from his previous apologies, which had always been followed by immediate requests for help or promises that things would be different if I'd just give him one more chance. "I accept your apology," I said. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quickly. "I don't expect you to trust me or welcome me back into your life like nothing happened. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and I'm sorry." "What do you expect, Bennett?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I expect to keep working on myself," he said finally. "To keep going to meetings and counseling and trying to become the kind of person who deserves to be in your life." Maybe someday, if I can prove that I've really changed, we can have some kind of relationship again, but if not, I'll respect that decision. I studied his face, looking for the signs of manipulation I'd learned to recognize during the worst of his addiction. The calculated vulnerability, the strategic humility, the subtle pressure designed to make me feel guilty for not immediately embracing him, but I didn't see any of that. What I saw was a man who seemed genuinely different, genuinely remorseful, genuinely committed to change without expecting anything in return. "Would you like to come inside?" I asked, his face lit up with surprised hope. "If you're comfortable with that, I'll make coffee," I said. "We can sit in the kitchen and talk." As we walked toward the house together, I felt a cautious optimism I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe this was the beginning of something new between us. Maybe it was possible to rebuild what had been broken, to find a way forward that honored both the love I still felt for my son and the boundaries I'd learned to set for my own. Protection, or maybe this was just another false start, another temporary improvement that would dissolve under pressure the next time Bennett faced real challenges. Either way, I was okay. I'd learned to be okay regardless of what choices other people made, regardless of whether they lived up to my hopes or my fears. I'd learned that my peace didn't depend on anyone else's behavior, and my happiness didn't require anyone else's approval. The house that Bennett had once called an old shack was still my home, still the repository of 47 years of love and memories and careful accumulation of security. The money he'd never known about was still hidden safely throughout its walls, a testament to the patient work of two people who'd understood the value of building something lasting, and I was still the man Catherine had married, the father who'd raised a son with love and hope and the best intentions. Bennett's addiction had tested all of that, had nearly broken it, but it hadn't destroyed it. As I unlocked the front door and gestured for Bennett to follow me inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, curiosity about what might come next. Not hope exactly, but openness to the possibility that sometimes people really could change, that sometimes broken things could be mended, that sometimes lost relationships could be found again. Kitchen, where we'd had so many difficult conversations over the past few years, looked different in the afternoon light. Warmer somehow, more like the heart of a home where a family might gather to share news and stories and the ordinary intimacies of people who cared about each other. "The house looks good, Dad," Bennett said, looking around with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "You've done some work on it." "Some," I agreed, filling the coffee maker. I had the time, and the house deserved the attention. He smiled at that, and I realized he understood what I wasn't saying, that I'd invested in this place not because I had to, but because I wanted to, that I'd chosen to stay here and improve it and make it even more of a home, regardless of what anyone else thought about that decision. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "For standing up to me, I mean, for not letting me bulldoze you into making choices that were wrong for you. I know it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted, "but it was necessary." "Yeah," he said, "it was." We sat at the old oak table where we'd had so many conversations over the years, some wonderful, some terrible, and now maybe some that could be something in between. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, including the one Christopher had made for me, and realized that for the first time in years, the future felt open and full of possibilities I couldn't quite imagine yet. Outside, the October wind rustled through Catherine's maple tree, and somewhere in the distance I could hear children playing in their yards, their voices carrying the timeless sound of innocence and joy. Inside, a father and son sat across from each other, both changed by the hard lessons of the past few years, both cautiously hopeful about what might be possible if they were patient enough and careful enough and willing to do the work of rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. Throughout the walls of the house around us, carefully hidden and patiently waiting, lay the fruits of a lifetime spent building something solid and lasting $1 million that represented not just money, but the accumulated choices of 2 people who believed in planning for tomorrow and taking care of each other, and in the possibility that love could endure even when everything else seemed to fall apart. Bennett still didn't know about the money, and I wasn't ready to tell him. Maybe I never would be. But for the first time in years, that secret felt less like a burden and more like a foundation proof that Catherine and I had been right to build something lasting. Right to invest in the future, right to believe that patient work and careful choices could create security and beauty and a legacy worth protecting. The conversation we had that afternoon wasn't magical or transformative. We didn't solve years of hurt in a single sitting, didn't erase the damage that addiction had done to our relationship, didn't suddenly become the father and son we'd been before everything went wrong, but we talked. Really talked without ultimatums or demands or threats or manipulation. We acknowledged the past without trying to change it, discussed the present without making promises about the future, and began the slow work of figuring out whether there was a way forward that honored both the love that still existed between us and the boundaries that needed to remain in place. It was a beginning. Not an ending, not a resolution, not a return to the way things used to be. Just a beginning, fragile and uncertain but real, And sometimes, when you're 74 years old and sitting in the kitchen of the house you've called home for nearly half a century, having a civil conversation with the son you thought you'd lost forever, a beginning is more than enough, it's everything.